Calling the meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee on Wednesday, January 24th, to order. We usually try to get through our agenda in or under 2 hours, and I think what we have today we can get through. There's been basically a citizen's petition to revise some language on the Water Resource Protection District. It doesn't directly fall under the purview of this committee, but it does emanate from a long-standing study in Falmouth looking at the nitrogen in various watersheds and whatnot. And so I was asked if I could give some time on the agenda. And I think a member of the planning board approached us a couple of meetings ago, Mr. Dwyer, to ask if we could talk about it. So give you 15 minutes to explain what this is about, and I do not have it on here for any type of vote yet, so, okay?
Correct.
All right.
Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time, and I don't want to waste anyone's time. The reason that we got to this place is that as a committee member of a group that's looking to put a Y in Falmouth, we came across some language within the bylaw now that we felt could be updated. I know the current Water Resource Protection District has been established for quite a while, and some things have changed since then as far as wastewater treatment and other water treatment as well. So I just want to see if we can find some way of looking at not necessarily reducing the scope of that overlay, but maybe giving opportunities for some developments to have further analysis by their special permit granting authorities. So we, created an amendment, a proposed amendment to the bylaw that went into the town meeting article this past fall, but it was on short notice, so we didn't really have a whole lot of outreach opportunity to educate some of the boards. And when we got in front of the planning board, they didn't understand all the technical aspects of it. So after that all happened, we talked to the town planner, and he recommended that we come to see you, so obviously that's why we're here. But just a little rundown of what the current bylaw talks about is that the overlay districts as defined on the maps are there to protect the water resources that those watersheds feed into. But there's one little line in there that has to do with there's the density that's involved that's allowed in some of the overlay. But there's one line about the sewage flows, and that it's limited to 7.5 gallons per day per 1,000 square feet for non-residential uses. So obviously that also says that residential uses have as much flow as they can basically carry on that lot, given any other requirements that might be overlaid, as well as, say, the state overlays. So essentially that's about a 300 gallon per day. That's not even a 3-bedroom house for a 1 acre lot, 40,000 being the DEP's definition of 1 acre. So what we're asking at the town meeting, and what we'd like to move forward with a new article at the next available town meeting, is just say that the special permit granting authority may, by special permit, waive that limitation if the use uses advanced treatment for that wastewater, such that the loading would not result in more than, say, that 7.5 gallons per day of a Title V system per 1,000 square feet. So what does that mean? And here's just a couple of quick graphics. The red being the nitrogen-sensitive areas as defined by DEP. These blue hatched being the Zone 2s as defined by DEP. And here's the surface water area boundaries around Long Pond as, again, defined by DEP, Zone A, Zone B, Zone Cs. So the only really area that's in a local water resource protection district overlay that isn't already covered under some nitrogen concentration regulation is this one little area over in here, which happens to be a great spot for a Y to be just because of the traffic and other locations, the proximity to the people that would be using it, which is what the group is pursuing. Just a close-up view of that. Here's the high school right next door. So it's kind of a limited area that is falling within this. Again, these other red areas, zone 2s, everything else, there are limitations on how much nitrogen can be put into the wastewater in those areas. Mostly 440 gallons per day per acre, which is even less than what the current Water Resource Protection District bylaw says for non-residential use. So here's just a kind of quick graphic of what the current bylaw is. Let's say this green is 1,000 square feet, 7.5 gallons per day. With the Title V system, you could have, let's say, 50 milligrams per liter as an average for a nitrogen concentration in a typical Title V system. I know that can be debated and it ranges. We'll use that number. This, again, it would be up to the granting authority as far as how much density, how much more flow could go into this area, and based on the concentrations that they're going for. Obviously, the Board of Health, other departments would be involved in reviewing what the performance of that system would be. But if you do say that it's a system that can get down to 12 milligrams per liter, then you should be able to get up to, 4 times as much flow and still have less overall loading rate of nitrogen to that area. Again, that could be reviewed by the special granting authority, and maybe they don't give 4 times as much, depending on other considerations. So this is one avenue that we're talking about that could be updated. There are other parts within that current bylaw that could be amended to provide a little greater agreement with some of the other standards that are used and maybe opportunities that these parcels have as far as either connecting to sewer or possibly having an offset, a detached parcel somewhere else within that watershed that would be left for conservation and undeveloped in order to make up the density area that would be required to have the overall loading for that watershed. That's something similar to what the Cape Cod Commission does for their open space offsets and things as well. So, again, we're not looking for this board to say yes or no, approve. We're just trying to get some input from you, and this is going to be coming back again to the planning board as a special granting authority for such matters under the bylaw for the agricultural district that this is in and the particular use that we're dealing with, and it's going to come back in front of town meeting. There's going to be opportunities for people to discuss this. You guys have a good amount of education and experience and understanding of this topic, and I just wanted to get some input from you as we move this forward. And just one other clarification. In the agenda, it says that I work with the Woods Hole Research Group. It's just Woods Hole Group. I don't want to get it confused with the Woodwell Climate Research Center now.
Sure, can I just mention?
Yeah, and Kevin Clower is here as well.
Joel, you actually introduce yourself at the beginning. I didn't.
Sorry, I didn't know. Joel Kubik, I'm with Woods Hole Group. I'm just on the committee to help the Falmouth YMCA.
Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Kevin Clower. I'm also working with the YMCA on the potential development of a site here in town. We're pretty far down the path, but the question, the looming question, becomes this sewage flow. We are looking at a variety of potential avenues for addressing it. We have what is essentially a 6-acre site, which is more than enough to develop what we would like to develop, but for this question of sewage. So there are sort of 3 real avenues we're looking at. One is potentially amending the bylaw to find a way to address this without compromising the integrity of what this committee does and what the town has spent many years doing and what we have to continue to do as we deal with wastewater issues. But as you might imagine, a YMCA with a full-size pool has a larger output of quote-unquote wastewater, even though it's not wastewater as we would typically think of it. So we're looking at amending the bylaw. One possibility, if we cannot amend the bylaw, is to find additional land. As we've talked with the town, I've discussed this with a number of people in town, there's a question as to can we have detached land within the same watershed that would be preserved and counted towards this offset for the wastewater. And everyone seems to say, yeah, that makes sense, but that's not a definitive yes. And the only way we're going to get to a definitive yes is by going through the Cape Cod Commission, then coming to the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then we'll get a definitive answer, which is going to take many, many months and many, many thousands of dollars in plans. And require potentially an additional, 10 to 14 acres of land within the same watershed district, which is not easy to find, as one might imagine. And then the third possibility is connecting to the sewer at the high school, which is, a possibility. It is by no means a foregone conclusion, but even within the Water Resource Protection District, the bylaw doesn't address what happens if you connect to sewer, because there aren't many areas in the Water Resource Protection Districts that are connected to sewer. So I think even looking to clarify some of the language as Joel mentioned, saying, this would be that 7.5 gallon per day discharge is not applicable if you're connected to sewer. Those are minor tweaks we can make to the bylaw, even if we don't go as far as changing it as significantly as allowing for a waiver, which I think would make sense given, this bylaw was written in 1978. A lot of people put a lot of time and work and research into it, but a lot has happened over the past 46 years in terms of what we know about wastewater and how it's treated, and systems have come an awful long way. So this is, it's tough because what we're talking about is relative to one specific project, but of course you can't change the zoning bylaw for one specific project. You can't say for the YMCA this can be waived. So we have to find a way to potentially look at changing the bylaw that makes sense, is not a blank check to people to be able to develop whatever they would like. There's a few things that came up during the initial discussions that aren't applicable. People said, well, this is going to open the door to 40B developments. Well, 40B developments get to waive local zoning bylaws anyways, so that's not really an issue here. It's a special permit is on its face a subjective thing. It's not, while there are standards, the boards have discretion as to what they grant. And I think that we can build in enough protection so that we don't compromise the quality of water in town, and we don't compromise the efforts that have been made over the past 46 years to address the wastewater issues. So I just wanted to add those points. As Joel mentioned, we're not looking for the board to say yay or nay, but we want to be able to have a constructive conversation and find a way to craft this so that if we do pursue the change in the bylaw, that it's well thought out, it's brought through the appropriate boards, and we're able to proceed in a way that we know isn't going to compromise what we've spent many years doing.
Thank you, Kevin. If I can, just to start, can you put up the actual language that you want to use so we have something maybe in front of us? And then I'm certain you've done the math at some point. If you throw out 12 milligrams per liter, if this bylaw went through and you would at a 12 milligram per liter system, would you be able to get your flow on there? I guess I'm trying to see like this. Are you going to come one for one, or are you going to is there any savings in there? Because the phrase, the use of an advanced treatment system, right, is a little bit subjective. So I know the Board of Health, I think currently has got 12, John, right? So the question becomes, I just want to be sure that, that you've done your math, and 12 is a good thing for you.
The current system that they have designed is the Clean 2, which has been reaching under 12. Obviously, this is still going to have to meet the requirements of the Board of Health's approval for any kind of advanced system. We didn't want to lock it in here. I mean, there are other opportunities for some of these, and if, say, the system, the project wasn't able to meet that, the idea still is that whatever you're putting into the site is still overall less accumulation than the, so maybe they don't go 4 times as much development, right? So if they had 19, maybe they have 3 times as much. But the overall math that they would be doing was that the loading rate annually, kilograms per year, would be less than a typical Title V system for that same site. But yes, we believe that we can make that math work in this situation at 12 for this site, and that's more than enough.
Okay. I'm going to start at this end.
Okay, so I was on the zoning board for many years, and the issue I always had with zoning changes for specific projects is that they have townwide application, and I'm wondering if any analysis was done on how many parcels would fall within the purview of this bylaw. The other comment I have is that, as written, and maybe you want it to be a little bit vague, but it's pretty vague with respect to what's the concentration in the wastewater untreated and what's the concentration in the treated wastewater that's acceptable. Again, I think in general, if there's leeway, there's a lot of pressure on the zoning board to approve the project. You can always go to court to argue against their decision if they deny. So it'd be nice if there was a little more ironclad.
So I can speak to the first part of that question, Mr. Foreman. And we do miss you on the zoning board. But, you know, we haven't done an exact analysis of how many lots are affected. But what I would point out is that the Water Resource Protection Overlay District does significantly limit the uses that are permitted within those districts. So there's a lot of limitations set forth in the bylaw as to what kinds of uses can take place in that district anyways. So again, this isn't like a carte blanche and opens it up to whatever development people want. It's still gonna have the same protections that are set forth in the overlay district. Our project happens to fall within one of the permitted uses. Otherwise, we would have stopped this project long ago. So we haven't analyzed all of the lots potentially, but I can tell you that these are, you know, generally speaking, more rural lots in the Water Resource Protection District. And what we're looking at is not changing what's allowed, just potentially giving the board's purview to give some leeway in terms of what's approved relative to the discharge. As to the exact standards, I can let Joel speak to that, but I think that's certainly something we could try to nail down more clearly.
Do you have a?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up with Ken on his question about the flow coming in before treated. So, I mean, it depends on the use, what actually gets discharged from a site. So that could be part of a special granting, special permit granting's approval, that they have to test a similar site and see what it is, you know, without treatment, and then try and meet that proposed advanced treatment level so that the math could work for an individual site's particular flow, because it can vary.
Okay, my question would be, do you have a figure in mind of the size of your groundwater discharge permit that you'd be applying for? And also, just for general information, the size, square footage of the facility itself?
So it doesn't require a groundwater discharge permit. It's under 10,000 gallons per day.
So you'll be under that? Do you have a size in mind that you design your system
The
for?
designs are coming together pretty well. I don't know what the square footage of the building is right now. There's,
It requires Cape Cod Commission. We'll be going to
Yeah.
the commission. It's over 10,000 square feet.
Okay.
The exact number, I don't recall exactly off the top of my head. In terms of wastewater flow, I think it was around 7.
I think it's around 7,000 gallons per day is what's proposed right
Okay.
now.
Thank you.
I'm going from, so Title V is a little bit quirky in the where they give you how to figure your flows. I don't believe it says YMCA in the table. So is it based upon a presumed industrial how'd you come up with the 7,000, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm asking?
So we actually looked, I'm not doing the design myself. There's another company, Green Seal, that's working with them to do the designs and the permitting. I had done my own earlier on, just based on the typical types of things, and schools are similar. But based on the uses that are going to be combined within that, as well as they had done the water readings for the YMCA in Hyannis and another one of the similar size that's being proposed. Those both checked in pretty well against what was based in the Title V's descriptions, as well as the 200% of the water readings. So I think it's covered.
Just to follow up, I think they did look at historical usage for, I think, 2 to 3 other YMCA sites. Hyannis, I think Ashland was one, and I forget the other one, to get an idea of what, similar sized YMCA's run for typical usage, and as well as just looking at the Title V calculations.
A couple questions, or 3 questions. First one, I was confused. At first, I thought, looking at the agenda, that you represented the zoning board, but now it seems you actually are representing a particular client, right, a particular landowner. A very benevolent one that might serve the whole town, but it's still not the same as the town board. Is that correct?
We are not here on behalf of a town board. We are here, we brought this article to town meeting, planning board voted indefinite postponement, and then discussing it with the planning board and with Jed. It was suggested that we come to this committee to start a process of discussing a potential change to the bylaw, because no one was going to do anything without properly vetting it through various committees, including this one.
Okay, I would assume that before I know we're not voting on anything tonight, but before we did any voting, we would want to interact with the board itself, not with particular clients. And the second one is, there's this proposed amendment, then in your final slide, there are 3 bullets. Those are future other possible amendments, or those are backup plans, or what?
That's us discussing. Those are discussion points, really. We're looking, this is what we have currently as draft language. We are not married to this language. This is intended to be part of a discussion to come up with something that works for the town and makes sense and provides some latitude to the granting authorities.
Okay, and the last one is an easy one. I noticed you have a zoom feature. Can you zoom out and set it so I can see both the existing and the proposed at the same time? Great, thank
So
you.
we weren't looking to delete that language, but add that as a following
Right,
subsection.
but I can study that while you're getting the other questions from other people.
You guys will make these slides available to us, and then they'll get distributed out. Okay, thanks. John?
I'm set.
Tom?
I'm fine.
Okay. Well, informative. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
So we would, welcome the chance to come back and be on the agenda to continue discussing this at some future date.
Yeah, I will momentarily defer to Mr. Layton's sort of suggestion that probably if we pursue this further, our next step is to check in with the planning board or the town planner to find out where they're at and what they would see as our role.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Yep. Okay. Moving on to item 2, coming back to the urine diversion program, and specifically the proposal. I think we have a representative from the test center here tonight. Yep. Thank you. And while you're coming to the podium, just a brief update for everybody. At our last meeting, we talked about drafting something up to go to the DEP, asking them to review this proposal as well as what the committee that was formed felt were pluses and minuses in that proposal. And just so everybody knows, Ed did a good job of drafting it. It went out formally under Amy's signature from the town. That was back
The 12th.
the 12th or whatever. And Mary Beth has acknowledged receipt of the request, It says they'll begin the review of the documents in a couple of weeks, and we'll reach out to discuss upon completion of that review. So, for those of you curious, we did send along to the DEP. They have acknowledged it. They said they will look at it to provide their feedback on. And again, our focus is a little bit narrower than the bigger program, which is what we're doing, is what we are proposing to do going to lead to getting it approved as an IA that could be used in a nitrogen-sensitive zone. Okay. I'm going to turn this over to you a little bit, because you're the manager of this, and you probably have the questions, but,
Well, I think, we had collected some questions. There was a lot of public input. Specifically, we're looking for board questions. I sent them to you, both Brians. Thanks for being here tonight. And look forward to hearing what you can tell us for responses to those questions, so.
you have the questions? Okay, I'll make it up for you. That's okay. Did you bring the questions with you?
I have the email with a minute.
Yeah. This was his response back.
Yep.
Did those questions include what are they gonna do with the urine collection?
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, if you want, we can start at that end of the board. Every board member has some questions around the thing, and maybe it's just as clean to kind of walk down.
Yeah, 'cause I think they came from several of the members, and, a big one. Well, Ken, go ahead.
Well, yeah, so one thing that we all wondered was, if you are proposing to pick up the urine, you asked for a truck, I think, or you have a truck. So there's a large quantity of urine. What are you gonna do with it all? Was the question. Pretty simple.
Yeah, I could talk on that. So my name is Brian Horsley. I'm with the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, and envisioned to be sort of the lead at the test center on this project. So, the initial ideas for what to do with the urine. First off, I think that really the goal of this project is to assess, the efficacy of urine diversion as a nutrient management technique. But in addition to just managing the nutrients and getting the nutrients out of the waters and protecting water quality, the other component to the idea of urine diversion is the ability to recycle that urine and use it as fertilizer. And so the initial thought at the test center, being that we're a research facility, would be that we would use some quantity of that urine for research on creating urine-derived fertilizer. And so there are a few other organizations that have been doing this for a series of years now. But we would like to, take the next steps in advancing that research on making it into fertilizer. I agree, though, that there will be, a much greater volume than what we can use for research purposes coming in. Just a rough calculation, something to the tune of around 15,000 gallons per year, assuming we have about 50 participating households with 1.5 people in it. So there's still more work to be done on that. We do have a couple of local farmers who have reached out who are interested in piloting use as fertilizer. I think the fallback plan, which we've discussed in the past, would be putting it in a wastewater treatment plant, either the one adjacent to the test center or possibly in the town of Falmouth plant. But I think for the goals and intentions of urine diversion as a whole, that would be kind of a last resort. So I think we would do everything we can to figure out how to process and use that urine beneficially before we're discarding it to a treatment plant.
I'm going to jump in here a little bit, because this has been one of the sort of central questions about
Yep.
what happens to the urine. Through this pilot program, the town has been pretty clear that they don't want to get involved in having it go to the town's wastewater plant. The long term, as the program builds, at some point, a couple of years down the road, we can start looking at what does it mean in terms of receiving facilities and other things at the treatment plant. But for now, Amy's someplace in here. There she is in the back, sorry. But, Amy's been quite clear, and so I think we're trying to look for you guys collect the urine, and it's your urine through this test program.
Yeah, I think that's the initial intention. But of course, we do need to find pathways. We don't have, massive storage tanks at the test center, and nor do we want to compile huge amounts of urine. So we do need to find, pathways to move that urine somewhere.
Understood, but Amy's got some legitimate concerns about what's going on at her treatment plant.
Yeah.
And trucking this stuff around and bringing it over there and everything else, so.
Yep.
I think the cleanest thing is to get somehow or other a very positive statement that the urine gets collected by you, and you take care of it. If you get more than you can handle, maybe you have to slow down on collecting urine for a little while or something, I don't know, but,
Yeah.
or maybe you revisit, but right now, the town doesn't feel that they're ready for receiving large volumes of separated urine. Okay?
Okay.
No, that's, and by the way, Brian Baumgart, I'm the director of the
Yep.
test center, also the wastewater division. Perhaps there's been a bit of a misunderstanding along the way, or if things have changed in the interim, but, you know, some of the preliminary discussions we'd had indicated that the treatment facility would be available. So we'll have to definitely think about where that destination is going to be.
Yep.
Because that would definitely change, you know, the math, test center. We don't have an infinite amount of space to store urine, so this whole project was really built on the concept that was available. So we should have a discussion, I think, outside of this
Well, we
meeting.
can. But I will go back to
Verify.
the original meeting when we all sat down, and you indicated that, you know, when you're doing certain things at the test center, and it's time to get rid of whatever is left over, it goes to the basis treatment facility.
Typically it goes to the base.
Yeah.
There are some wrinkles with the base as well, because that facility has just been purchased by a private entity from the United States military, so they might not be so willing to receive
Interesting.
urine either. So we're gonna have to, if Falmouth's not available, we'll have to take a hard look at what that destination would be, given the change in ownership of that facility at JBCC.
Okay. So I guess a quick follow-up, if I may. So, but you would be pasteurizing on site?
Mhm.
And obviously, so I've been to the Rich Earth Institute, and they have those 250-gallon cubetainers, or whatever you call them. That would be sort of how you'd store stuff temporarily?
I think, I mean, you know, the pasteurization process would be sort of dedicated to the urine that's, you know, eyeballed to be reused as fertilizer. You know, any
Right.
urine that's planned to be discarded, there'd be no purpose in pasteurizing that. So I think, you know, working with the farms that I mentioned, you know, potentially expanding to other farms off Cape, you know, would be, you know, the ultimate goal would be to have all of it go to farms and, you know, offset the need for synthetic fertilizer production.
But doesn't it need to be
Farms.
pasteurized before application to the farm?
Yes, yeah, but what I'm saying
I
is, you
mean,
know,
my understanding of the pasteurization process is, among other things, it also prevents volatilization to ammonia and loss.
yeah, there's a treatment process, so there's acidification to, you
Right.
know, stabilize the nitrogen. There's also phosphorus precipitation, because some farms, you know, depending on soil tests, you know, don't want phosphorus, so we could actually remove the phosphorus. And then there's other methods like fermentation, where you can actually further stabilize the urine and create a better fertilizer. Pasteurization is just a very sort of simple way to kill pathogens and make sure that it's, you know, pathogenically safe for reuse. But that's, you know, something we would be looking at throughout the scope of this project is you know, testing those different treatment methodologies. And, you know, the ultimate goal, like I said, would be to, you know, find beneficial reuse pathways for all of the urine, you know, for as many people that want to participate across the Cape. But this being, you know, kind of a first step into a new world here, it would take, you know, some time to figure these things out, you know, what the pathways are.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think as you look at this, and this, as Steve said earlier, this is one of the big questions and concerns that have come about as the board looks at this proposal. We need a minimum of 50 people for 3 years to meet the DEP data collection requirement. We've expanded that, and you expanded the proposal to allow up to 75 over a 4-year period, knowing that we'll have fallout along the way of people dropping out of the program or deciding not to participate before they even get to the gate. So hopefully we end up with the 50. We have also, as a working group that was formed outside of the committee here, recommending that, and this is not approved yet, but that we open it up, the program, to what we call portable collection. People that are not doing 100% urine diversion, but are collecting some amount of urine by various portable means. We've suggested that they'll be required to have a minimum of a 50-gallon tank on site, so that it's not, hey, I got 5 gallons, come get it. But as you look at what are you going to do with this stuff and where are you going to store it and what your capacities are for pasteurization, for instance, we'd have to look at what is that volume potentially at a, I'm not going to say worst case, a best case. We get more participation than we anticipate. We get a full 75, and maybe at that point we say, look, we're going to triage that down and bring it to, 50 or 60 because we just can't support that many. And also limit, maybe if everybody wants to participate, the portable storage folks. But there's additional volume on top of what was originally in the proposal. So I just throw that as cautionary information. So I think the mission would be to look at what kind of max volume you see you could handle from storage, pasteurization, and disposal. And is that site now at the base going to be available? I think there was also mention by you folks that you need some volume of this material for testing the IA systems. That is your core mission up there. Is that still valid? And what, is that a significant volume?
No, it wouldn't be as significant. It's more, it's more to, to actually increase the nitrogen content of the wastewater. The facility at JBCC, our averages are around 50 milligrams per liter or so right now. But in order to simulate true house conditions, we need higher levels of nitrogen. In the field, we see on average closer to 85 to 90 milligrams per liter. So, I mean, I think we're all kind of guessing at some low numbers here. But that's what the field data is showing from the project that we're working on in Schuylkill Pond with the nitro technology, where we're taking samples straight from septic tank effluent. And that's indicating that we're seeing much higher values. So in order to properly simulate that sort of a nitrogen level, we're looking at potentially supplementing that. But it wouldn't be for every system. It wouldn't, it's more like, we'd be supplementing with 5 gallons, a week or a month. It would be small amounts because there's so much, it's highly concentrated nitrogen in urine. I mean, through the study that you did, you came up with some pretty good numbers from that.
Yeah, average of 7,000 milligrams per liter nitrogen is what we found in a preliminary study in urine.
So you don't need much for spiking
Right.
to get the numbers that they're looking for. So that's a minimal use case.
One of the other questions that was submitted had to do with the baseline sampling.
Mm-hmm.
And the concern being that if you take a baseline today at a septic tank and you do one a week from now or a month from now, historically, do you have any feel for, is that baseline reading changing significantly? So is there a need to take more than one baseline reading? I mean, we're talking quarterly readings at the tanks during the program. What is the baseline variability you might be familiar with at an individual household? Any idea?
Yes, I think, the best, sort of raw septic tank effluent data that we have is from the Schuylkill Pond project that Brian just mentioned. I was actually there sampling septic systems all day today. And so we have a couple of years of data on that, and, it's really a wide range. So, relying on averages is, kind of challenging, I guess, or maybe not the best way to estimate, I guess, what the effect is of urine diversion. So, we were talking about this yesterday, and I think, in our proposal.
Are you saying that at a given location, at different points in time, there's a wide range? In other
There
words,
can be, yeah, depending
There's a lot
on.
of temporal variation.
There can be, yeah.
So what Ed is getting at is then, if you only take a single
Yep,
preliminary baseline,
yep,
even though you have a whole bunch afterwards,
Yep.
you know absolutely nothing.
Yep. No, I
Because you don't know
understand.
what you're
Yep.
comparing it to.
I understand, yeah. So I think in the proposal, we suggested doing 4 baseline samples initially. But what Brian and I spoke about yesterday is that, we will be measuring the water usage in the household while we're sampling the urine tanks. So we'll have, basically we'll be looking at the entire nutrient load. We're not going to be looking at this in terms of concentrations. So we'll be able to actually, sort of back calculate what the load would have been had we not diverted the urine throughout the project. So, I agree that, of course, a longer-term, baseline would probably give you a more accurate average on what the septic tank has, flowing through it. But I think, with the way that this project is designed, the fact that we'll be measuring water usage, we will be able to accurately back calculate, what the septic tank concentration would have been without urine diversion and what it now is with urine diversion. if that makes sense.
That's an important piece. So, yeah, so we're calculating water use through the house going into the septic tank, which is now just the non-urine component of the wastewater. We're gonna be taking samples of that septic tank effluent, so we can calculate how much what's the nitrogen load there? How many kilograms of nitrogen are we getting per day through the septic tank? And in addition, we'll know how many kilograms per day we're collecting from the urine by measuring the volume in the tank and the concentration of the urine. So we'll be able to tell you exactly what you would have had in the septic tank with a certain factor, because you're not flushing toilets now. There's a certain amount of water that's been removed through that process, but it would give you a good estimation, certainly, of what the concentration and the load would have been for the whole household with and without the urine diversion.
Well, I'm confused. You just said that at this site, where you have a bunch of variations, that you got variation. Are you saying that if you had also known the water flow at that same site for each of those times, there's an equation you could use that would make it all come out the same?
Yeah, we do that. In that project, we actually have water meters installed on all of those houses. In fact, we can get 10-minute water use data out of those. They're so accurate. And that allows us to precisely calculate what exactly the mass load is through each of those houses. So we don't just need to rely on concentrations to tell us what the loading is through each of those homes. And we can tell from influent to effluent on those. So we can tell you exactly how many kilograms of nitrogen are going into the septic tank, or well, coming out of the septic tank rather, and how many kilograms of nitrogen that system has removed. We can give you those precise numbers. This would be much the same in that you were calculating what's coming through the septic tank. We'll be able to tell what's in the urine. That would, the sum of those two numbers is the loading through the total system, and would represent what the loading would be without doing urine diversion. So the baseline sampling, I think, is important, but I wouldn't get too hung up on it because we're doing that additional monitoring to get the live data. We try to avoid baseline sampling as much as we can because it's just not as informative as you might think it would be in these situations. We only do it where we have no opportunity to actually do that load calculation. We're working on a system in Barnstable. It's a FujiClean technology that was intended for phosphorus reduction. And we have no means of sampling the incoming wastewater because of the way the FujiClean system is set up. There's no septic tank, and it recirculates wastewater. So we don't know what the incoming is. We did baseline sampling there just so we would have a concept, but it's very difficult in that situation because you've got continuous recirculation of treated wastewater back into the headworks to get better treatment. So, we did some baseline there because we can't do that. But in this case, we'd be able to do those calculations and get you'd have the real number through both treatment modalities.
The question of water usage, Kristen, if sewers get 90%, right? Like if we don't, I'm just, the DEPs through the MEPs, they got this one of their magic numbers that says you take the water usage, you take 90% of the water usage, and then you convert it into kilograms that you remove by sewering. So to the extent that you're measuring water usage and whatnot, then you come up with a number that's straying, I don't know what you've been seeing so far, if it starts to stray far off that 90% number that the DEP's been telling us to use, that's going to be another variable we're going to have to work with them on at some point, okay? I'm not objecting to it, I'm just pointing out that
There were assumptions made in the modeling process that, the currently collected data is indicating might need to be looked at some point. That's what it's boiling down to.
Okay. You have more, Steve?
Yeah, how soon will you know that the new landlord of the facility there, whether they will or will not take the urine?
So they're assuming control of that facility on March 1st of this year. So we're in the countdown for them. I believe it's public record, but there was a non-compliance with that plant. So they have some concerns that they need to address right off the bat with respect to their discharge. Perhaps in the future, once they're able to resolve some of those issues, they might be more willing, but I don't think, certainly within the next few months until they're able to get that plant functioning the way it needs to be.
I mean, that seems like that might be a very critical path and
Yeah.
limiting factor in this whole thing.
I think, you know, we're building this on, you know, we need, there's two things at odds. We need enough systems to be able to demonstrate to DEP that they work, but we also have the problem of we don't have a disposal location really well established for urine fertilizer at this point, because Massachusetts takes the viewpoint that urine fertilizer that's been pasteurized is a biosolid, so now you're talking about all the biosolids regulations that come into play, in addition to regulations from MDR for fertilizer use. You know, I think there are a lot of things that we need to work out, and we need to find the destinations. There are a lot of farms, I think you've talked to a few, that they've indicated willingness to accept this as a product, and I think ultimately that's what our goal would be, but in the interim, we're you know, in order to build the 50 that you need to prove the provisional aspect of things, you know, it just increases the flow. Ultimately, we're gonna have a fraction of this that we need to dispose of somewhere. So in order for this project to go forward as we've proposed, we have to find, if Falmouth's treatment plant isn't available and JBCC isn't available to receive, we're really gonna have to think pretty hard about where we're actually gonna be able to dispose of some of this until we can spin up that other piece, because that's, you know, this proposal is trying to answer some of those additional questions. You know, we're technologists, we're just trying to figure out how this can work. So that's what the proposal is predicated on, is being able to figure out and work through some of those big questions about this.
John?
Yeah, I have several questions. You know, our goal as a town is to get provisional use from DEP for urine diversion and be able to put it into our toolkit with other IA systems. And as part of that, and Brian, this is a little off the subject, we will need to have a successful responsible management entity in order to make that work. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was how we're doing with putting that together. But the other point of the responsible management entity is that urine diversion systems, like any other IA, will have a constant monitoring requirement into the future. So it's not enough to just install urine diversion toilets in a house. They're going to have a sewer fee exactly like any other IA maintenance. In other words, in perpetuity, you're going to have to prove to DEP that they're functioning to a certain level. So the idea that we're simply going to put urine diversion toilets into a house, test them for 3 years, and then we're done is not the case. One of the other things I was concerned about, and whether we can pass the buck to you, is we need to get from the plumbing board approval for these urine diversion toilets. And is that a responsibility that, as the pushers of this proposal, you're willing to take on? In other words, we need to get that sorted out before we're going to make a great deal of progress.
Right. Well, I'll start with the RME question, and if you don't mind taking the plumbing board question. Sure. So the RME, you know, of course, we started that about a year ago with money from EPA, Nature Conservancy, Barnstable County, to start to put that program together. And the regulation changes that came along really threw, you know, a grenade into a lot of wastewater management planning processes, particularly in Wellfleet, where we had planned on doing a significant amount of this work. So there's been a lot of delay because of those external factors. You know, we're still putting the pieces of this together. So we're working on what's called the Recommended Technology Panel, which is working to identify those technologies that perform the best and utilize the broad suite of data that's available throughout the country rather than just focusing on Massachusetts or Cape Cod data. That group will produce a list of, you know, here are the systems that are available, here's how they perform, and it becomes a town decision as to which ones, what are your thresholds? You know, we'll say, these systems will get you 5 milligrams per liter, these will get you 10, and you're gonna need to look at your watersheds and say, these are the ones that'll work, and these are the ones that won't work, and then, you know, you kind of go from there. So that panel has been working on collecting that data, and I'm hopeful that within the next probably 5 to 6 months, we'll have the first, you know, sort of cut at that set of data. So that's one of the critical functions we've been working on in the meantime. In addition, we're bringing on some more staff so that we can start to, I don't want to say accumulate, but start to bring in some of the existing technologies that are out there right now. So West Falmouth Harbor, there's 40 systems or so that are installed there that Buzzards Bay Coalition has been sort of shepherding along through the process. We've been in discussions with them about taking on the responsibility of those through the Responsible Management Entity Program. So we're starting to build the pieces up so that once we get to the point with something like the urine diversion project, or when a town decides, hey, it's time for us to start requiring IA technologies, we have those pieces in place. But like I said, the regulations really threw a lot of town plans.
So
into
that's
disarray.
another really critical part of that, which we several years ago in developing a CWMP for Oyster Pond, agonized about it. We put together, George Hoyfeller and I worked on a model of an RME for Oyster Pond watershed. And one of the issues was, in order to make the maintenance economically reasonable, you couldn't have the testing procedure which DEP mandates for individual IAs, quarterly for, So we came up with a program that by random number, you picked houses and you did them once a year. And we had considerable discussions with DEP, with Brian Dudley before he retired, about whether DEP might buy into that reduced testing schedule. And we never could push him over the top on that. But it seems to me that in order to make an RME work efficiently, we're going to have to come to some agreement with DEP on a reduced testing schedule. And it seems to me that really ought to be a primary goal of that RME proposal that you guys are working on.
Yep, absolutely agree. Yeah, it's a very important part. We've been in discussions with DEP about that. It's my understanding that they're still, the current staff, since Brian Dudd has left, are still committed to the extent that it's not written down somewhere that, they'd be willing to look at doing monthly sampling, particularly once they get to general approval out of the provisional stage. There was some talk about the give from DEP saying you don't have to sample so much, but you've got to have somebody go out and look at it more frequently, unless you have remote monitoring. So that's another aspect of things that we're taking a hard look at, is remote monitoring aspects as well. So, but I want to give Brian an opportunity to answer a little bit about the plumbing board question as well.
Yeah, so I guess, I'll admit right off the bat, I haven't had a lot of conversations with the plumbing board, but what I can say is that I know that urine diverting fixtures have been installed throughout Massachusetts for a long time now. And so there are certainly pathways, but I do agree that there needs to be further conversations with them, especially for the purposes of this project. I think to date, urine diversion toilets have been allowed to be installed under a variance or a pilot approval in most cases. I also understand that the urine diversion committee has had, I believe, some conversations with the plumbing board. So I'd be curious to learn more about how those conversations have gone.
Let me just jump in if I can for 1 second.
Yeah.
So, Matt, if I misstate anything here, you help me out. My understanding is when we were looking at composting, that the pathway we went down was to go to the plumbing board, and for each location, identify it as a standalone pilot facility. So they weren't approving a device for general use or across the board. And that that's how I recall what happened before, Matt. Is that consistent?
I'm not Matt.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have a resemblance to him, though, from this distance.
Thank you.
But I think you were.
I think that's correct.
I think that's what we had to do. And so, again, staying in the short-term focus, which is getting to the point where it's approved for use as an IA, I think there's for each home, we would identify the devices they were going to use and would then drop this package off, okay? The issue about getting an individual device approved, historically, my understanding is it's fallen back on the individual manufacturer to spend money on third-party testing of things like shatterproof, all these things, and that that, last I heard, that cost was a minimum of $10,000 to each vendor. So the market's got to be there for somebody to want to make these things and put the money up. The town's not, at this point here, I don't see the town spending a lot of money for permitting private vendors' products. Okay?
Yeah, I'm not sure that would be necessary. You know, I think the process that we've envisioned would be sort of the same process that anyone would go through now who wants to install a composting toilet or urine diverting toilet or a gray water system. You know, you would have a home assessment completed to look at, you know, what your options are. Then you would come up with a design, and then you would, you know, go for approval based upon that design. And it would certainly have to be, you know, individual for each one of the homes, because I think each home, you know, some homes might have urinals, some might have composting toilets, some might have urine diverting composting toilets, some might have urine diverting flush toilets, you know, vacuum toilets. There could be a whole variety of different fixtures that are, you know, chosen in each individual home. So it would have to be a case-by-case approval basis, I think.
To,
I'm going to try to get down to Tom. We haven't got to Tom
I
yet.
want to just answer his
ahead.
question to what discussions
Yeah.
we have had with the plumbing board. In a nutshell, what Steve said is the traditional, and the only way that could happen now is each home would be a test site, just as the Falmouth program 10 years ago. They did indicate a willingness to approve more on a blanket for this project, so like, oh, all 50 houses could put in this toilet that has been proven in use and accepted by some entity, a government agency somewhere in the country or possibly in the world, that it has been approved by someone, and that they would accept that for the purposes of this program. In, let's say, in theory, they said, toilet A can be used by all 50, they wouldn't need that individual thing. But that is the extent of what they've opened up. And, you know, you and I, Brian, have talked about, are any of the manufacturers got a approval from, you know, somebody in Europe, Australia,
Yep.
wherever? And so far, it's not there, but maybe, but that's it.
I'm gonna get-
Question
I'm gonna
about
get-
that.
I'd like to get to Tom. Tom hasn't had a chance to ask any question yet.
Okay, but that's relevant just to his point, which was,
Do you want to yield, Tom?
Yes, I'm yielding.
very brief question. If they did that, and would that mean then that if we got general approval, it's only for that toilet fixture?
Good question.
Unless you had one that you could submit.
Yeah.
Mine is all.
Right, but I mean, I'm assuming if they did this blanket thing, and so everyone puts in, you know, the Laufen Eco Flush or whatever it's called, you're stuck with that, which it might be okay, but it is a constraint.
Yeah, if I had to guess, from the discussions we've had with DEP, they're looking at it as a technology group, like together as a provisional approval, which is good. My familiarity, obviously, with the plumbing board is much more limited than with DEP, but what I do know is that, yes, likely they would say, well, you know, technology A, let's have you come down and we'll give you the blanket, and technology B, now you come and give us your, you know, because that's usually the way stuff like that works, but. Plumbing board is a bit of a mysterious entity to me, I will admit.
Okay, is the plan still to require 100% conversion for a household to be a full participant? in the
We have not yet taken a vote to that, but.
For that,
we-
okay, because, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm going to express my opinion on this a little bit, which
Right.
is that I think in order to have something that will pass through the DEP to get to IA, it's going to have to be a case where everybody has to, all bathrooms have to have urine diversion in order to work inside the nitrogen-sensitive zone for the data to go forward. That doesn't mean that if you're not in the nitrogen-sensitive zone and urine diversion is an option you want to choose, that you would have to convert all bathrooms. But I think right now, for us to try to go to them and try to get approval for converting one of three, Kristen, somebody looked up the relative number of bathrooms in homes and
Right,
potential areas, and, you know, very few of them had one bathroom.
right.
Right?
There's about 40% in the data that Kristen got from the GIS surveys had just one.
Yeah.
And then it fell off from there. But the recommendation of the working group was to be a full participant, part of the 50 minimum. and to be eligible for the subsidy, again, which is a proposal, not an approved thing, you would have to convert all. Basically, all urine from that site would have to leave the site.
Or have urine diversion devices. Okay.
Right, I mean, but there's workarounds because the systems are gonna be monitored for years afterwards, and obviously if people are, I hate to call it cheating, but if they're not diverting, it's gonna show up right away, and they could lose their occupancy permit or whatever. So,
Yeah. As we
So
begin,
anyway, that's a
as we
key
move down the
question,
path
I think.
of, checking out people's dwellings to see what it means for them to be a participant and
yeah,
informing them as to, documents that would have to be prepared and agreed to be a participant, the pluses and minuses, the risks and the rewards need
right,
to be clearly spelled out. So there's a bit of work to be done there still, okay?
good, that's it for me.
I'll come back to you in 1 second if I can. So I want to step momentarily back at sort of a little bit of the bigger picture inside the proposal. One is to be clear on cost sharing, obviously you've got some skin in the game with your staff and whatnot. I think, again, my personal position is we haven't taken a board vote to make a recommendation to the selectmen, but I think to the extent that there are project costs that are related to getting to DEP approval as an IA, those are costs that we're considering. To the extent there's costs for developing a market or, engaging other, whatever, I don't see I don't see how I can vote to recommend the town do that. Again, this whole sort of developing a market for the urine seems to me like more of a county-wide or a Commonwealth issue rather than a town of Falmouth issue, okay? The other one is, I think if I've read your proposal correctly, your expectation is that the town of Falmouth, once this is properly funded, would then proceed to put out some form of RFP or RFQ to get a project manager, that you're not you didn't read it as though you're the project manager.
No, we could function as project yeah, it was written for salary for our staff.
Okay, so
Yep.
that wasn't
Yep.
quite clear to me whether, but I'm not the expert on the whole contracting business right now, but I think we'd have to check with our procurement folks in town about whether we'd have to write an RFP for the project manager and how your role would fall out. I'm flagging that to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you're not surprised where we're at, okay?
We do a lot of grants. We understand that there's a lot of processes in place for those things.
And my third sort of what overarching question, it's probably mundane in some ways, but are you doing your own lab analysis, or do you ship this stuff out to an independent lab?
All of our samples go through the Barnstable County Water Quality Lab, so it's
Okay.
within the
So
county.
It's within the county, okay, yeah.
There's still a cost associated.
Yeah, no, I know there's a cost associated with it. I just,
Yep.
again, a couple times it's bubbled up, who's doing the lab analysis, how's it getting done, yada, 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 and whatnot, so, okay. Those are my sort of three questions. Steve, you got a follow-up?
Yeah, this has to do with several things that have already been discussed. When it comes time to actually signing a contract with the 50 or 75 volunteers, we have to look out for them and we have to look out for the town. And one of the key things that you may not want to think this far ahead, but you have to, is after the 3 years, who is required to do what? For instance, if you've gotten approval for these fixtures just as experimental test setups, does that continue? And the after 3 years has parts A and B. A is everybody's happy it worked. The B scenario you don't want to talk about, but you know what it is. It doesn't work. So you have to cover the homeowners who are nice enough to be volunteers, and even though they got reimbursed, their house is full of appliances that are no longer approved. That's not acceptable, obviously. And you have to be upfront about that. And the same for the monitoring and the urine collection. You can't say, well, yes, you can keep the fixtures and they're approved, but we don't know what to do with the urine. So I'm just suggesting that you cover all those bases.
Steve, can I just jump in a second? It is the Board of Health which permits
I'll look at it, yeah.
and regulates all of the IAs. And we have just finished redoing our home rule regs, so we have failure criteria. What happens if you fail? Do you have to go back to provisional sampling? So all of that is dealt with, and that will be something that the Board of Health will handle.
The ones from 10 years ago are mostly still in place.
Yep.
And so I guess the take-home message is that if you put in any IA, it comes from the state with a letter that says it must perform to a certain set of standards. And the Board of Health is going to hold you to those standards in perpetuity. In other words, you're going to have to continue to monitor that IA forever. And at the moment, what we do on the Board of Health is we start you out with a fairly aggressive testing schedule, say quarterly for 2 years. If the system is operating to what it is supposed to, we will then reduce that testing schedule to once per year. But we will then keep track of that once per year. If you fail for 2 successive testing years, you got to go back to the 4 again until you get it fixed. So all of that is built into the Board of Health's maintenance and monitoring system.
But that's only if you're required to have an IA. If you did
Any
it in a watershed that doesn't
any
require,
IA
just
that's-
because you're a volunteer,
Any
you could
IA
always say, oh, I went back to a Title V. It looks weird, it has an extra tank, but just look at it as a Title V.
As long as the IA is in the ground in Falmouth, it's going to have to meet whatever standards it was licensed for. If you decide at some point that you have an IA that you don't want and you would like to go back to Title V, we're going to monitor how you install the new Title V system.
Seems mean.
No, yeah. You guys can have a
No,
long
no, go ahead.
conversation at coffee over this, okay?
More coffee.
I am going to try to move on, give a little more information. But I've become aware that DEP now has a working group for the nitrogen-sensitive zones, where they are wrestling with the fact they've put regulations out there, and there are some concerns on implementation or effectiveness. Are you a participant in that?
Not at this time, no.
But you are aware of their,
Yeah.
okay. I thought that was, one of those things that as this stuff moves along, we may have some inputs that they could utilize.
Definitely.
Okay, that's good. Okay, I would also like to provide a little bit of an update on articles, if I can. There's a petitioner's article that was prepared and submitted. There was also an article prepared and submitted by the town staff through the wastewater department. At the present time, there is no town article. The petitioner's article will be the lead article for this. And the financing of the article has been indicated to me that it will require a Proposition 2.5 override, 2/3 vote at town meeting, and a majority vote at the May town meeting. So my understanding, I did not participate in the meeting, but my understanding is that the feeling by those that were doing their review was having 2 articles for the same thing would be confusion. And at the moment in time, the only article that could be withdrawn at that point was the town's article. So this board will have to come to a position in the fairly near future about how we feel about the petitioner's article and make some vote to be a recommendation that we would pass to the Board of Selectmen relative to that. And I think when we get there, we can structure the fact that, absent of a petitioner's article, there would have been a town article that basically says virtually the same thing. I haven't gone word for word on it, but they read pretty similar when they were.
So we've seen a proposed budget, and,
We have a proposal.
right. I just wonder if, in light of any questions about disposal, some of the things that we've just brought up, if that budget should be revised in any way.
I don't know if anybody's watching on TV, but I'll come over here anyway. My suggestion would be that we, meet with the water quality group to refine the proposal so that it fits with what your needs are in the current sort of situation. Obviously, it's a proposal, it's open to change. We need to tailor it to meet the town's needs and the needs of the project. So, I would suggest an open line of communication so we can, remediate those questions.
My sort of viewpoint on this, Ken, goes like this. We have a number. We don't yet have any contracts. So town meeting is a funding mechanism. Then you contract. So we can refine the numbers or all sorts of things inside the proposal as we move towards implementation.
But you did indicate some concerns about not necessarily funding the portion of it that might be related to application of the urine for fertilizer,
Yep.
for example.
Yep.
So that might mean changing your budget in some way, if you want to get an affirmative vote from us.
So I'll try this. Within the time frame we have between now and when we're going to get to town meeting and the steps that are going to go through and go into the finance committee, the number is likely to come down some if we delve into it with them on the details, but I don't think it's going to go from roughly the 1.9 million it is now down to under 1 million. Okay? The big item in there is the concept of subsidies.
Right.
And I have been trying to work up some sort of baseline information as to what does it mean if you get sewer, what does it mean if you put just an IA, and what does it mean if you put a urine diversion in, and what are the anticipated costs and whatnot, to compare it, as well as looking at where the town subsidizes a portion. So I don't know if I'll be ready for the next meeting in 2 weeks, but I'll definitely be ready within a month. But I'm trying to be ready to put on the agenda in 2 weeks a discussion on homeowners' costs for different options. Okay, and like recently the state passed that new extended thing that provides a lot of money in terms of tax credits that's applicable to approved IAs. So the issue then rolls back to, if you get 75 people to participate now, and it's not an approved IA, and the 76th person shows up when it's approved IA, and they now get to tap into an $18,000 tax credit over 6 years, where's the fairness in all of that? So I've been trying to build a little bit of a spreadsheet and punching some numbers into it, okay? I have some cost numbers way back from, on the sewer side, there was an exercise about if you're on an E1, the low-pressure sewer, or you're on the gravity sewer. So there's some variables in there. When you start looking at IA systems in general, you got three sort of cases. One is you get told you have to have an IA system. You're on a cesspool. Now you've got to put in a whole new system, right? You got a functioning Title V system, and now you've got to upgrade it to an IA. Is your plumbing such that you can fit it in someplace as an additional piece of tankage? We've been throwing numbers out there that say, $30,000 for an IA system, but that's not the cost of putting another tank in. The tank might have to have a pump to get to the leach field. Okay, so there's 2 or 3 different variables under the IA.
Right.
Okay, so.
Steve, could I
And
comment on the funding
I just want to say the
process?
last thing was I'm talking about costs. There's, each one of those has a different fee attached. You get on the wastewater, you get on the sewer, you pay a wastewater bill, right? You get on an IA system, you're now part of a responsible management entity, plus you've got to pay sampling. Okay, so each one of them has an operating cost after that.
I'd like to just comment on the funding as we go forward with this project. And I don't think Kim Comart is here this evening,
No, he's not.
but
He's chasing the Quetzal.
he indicated at the last meeting that he thought he had a sufficient number of people to fill the slots that we would need to make this proposal work.
About 110.
Okay, and so if that's the case, Doug Brown, when we talked last about the $80,000, which our select board has appropriated, indicated that he thought that should be used for education.
I thought that was the intent.
So
Yeah.
if Kim has said, we've already got enough people lined up to do this project, it would seem to me the most intelligent thing to do with that $80,000 would be to get a project manager and begin to go through those people who've indicated they're willing to go through the process and look at their individual houses, so that when we go to town meeting and ask them for $2 million, we'll be able to say already, the project manager has started going through, it looks like we're going to be able to line up the 50 people who are going to commit to doing this for everything for 3 years. And that, I think, would give us a lot of better chance to get this thing funded at town meeting, and then to get it passed through a general, we're going to need a 2/3 vote at town meeting, and then we're going to need to get it passed through the May elections, a 2.5 override. So I think if we can jump on using that $80,000 to begin to go through individual homes, give people an idea what exactly we would appraise that it would cost for them to participate, that would give us a big jump on this project, and I think give it a much better chance of success than if we just go to town meeting blind and ask for $2 million.
So, John, the exercise is, who and how are we going to get that person? I know Amy's sitting in the back row. If there was a seat out in the parking lot, she'd probably try to be in it now, because, I'm going to volunteer, Amy, that you and I should talk with the town manager as to how the town wants to approach this, John, because, there's putting either an RFP or an RFQ out fairly quickly. And somebody's got to write that, and then somebody's got to prepare it, okay? So there's a little bit of work to be done, but I'm not 100% certain that we've yet identified who, where, and how in the town this is going to be done, whether it falls under Board of Health, it falls under the wastewater, or where. So we need to pin that down. And I agree that would be, the exercise as I read it with the money was taking the list of the 110 and go, catching up with that person and saying, okay, let's see what you got in your house for plumbing. What does it look like? What does it look like? And then B, even if we don't have it all done, at least starting from where we were with the last time we did this, note that the type of contracts, the type of things that will happen, and to your point, Steve, what it means at the end of it, okay? Needs to be codified. I'm gonna let our selectmen talk.
Hi, Doug Brown, Select Board. Just want to say that before we hire, we certainly need to figure out the question of where the urine might go or might not be able to go before we can do any hiring. And I'd like to ask the wastewater superintendent if it's a short-term concern or a long-term concern about bringing the urine to the plant, if I could. Would you be prepared to answer that?
Amy Lowell, wastewater superintendent. I'm happy to talk more about it. It depends a lot on what volume and concentration we're talking about and how it's dispensed and how it's handled. The wastewater plant. There's a lot of I don't really know what this would involve, and I can't just say without a conversation with the DEP and with the operators how we could accommodate this. We have a construction project that is just starting on the site, and we have a busy septic receiving area, so we're certainly not interested in, I would be very concerned about lots of trips with smaller containers and all of that. But also, if we got a bigger delivery, I'd be concerned about how it would be fed into our system slowly over time, so we didn't shock load the system. So those are the kinds of concerns I have about it. So I was surprised to hear Brian say that you built this proposal assuming that it could go to the wastewater plant. I think, I remembered in our meeting a long time ago that at that time, there was
At the
the base
picnic
plant,
table.
base plant was running the way it was running, and I had assumed that they would take it. So those are my concerns. It's not necessarily that they can't be overcome, but those are the concerns that I'd expressed.
Specifically, I was really just wondering if it's a short-term concern about the discharge or if it's the chemical management of it. So I think you've answered that. It's both, really, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Tom said his hand up for quite a while.
I just was concerned about the practicality of starting this survey because a really, really conservative number, I think, would be 3 hours for someone to get to a household, meet with the homeowner, assess the existing fixtures, and either there or somewhere else come up with some numbers. So that right there is 8 40-hour weeks for 110 households. If you have one person that does nothing but that. So this idea of interacting with the homeowner and doing that assessment in and of itself is a pretty big, somewhat long-term job. Now, leave it at that.
You can fit that into 80K.
Yeah, you can, but I'm just saying, just the timeline for getting this done. It's not a quick open and shut case. It's going to take a couple of months of legwork.
So noted.
While they
Okay,
figure out
that's
where
all
the
I wanted to
urine
say.
goes. It can be simultaneous with while they figure out where the urine goes.
Yeah. Maybe you could take some urine with them.
I'm sorry, I had one more comment I forgot to make. Also, we've talked about 50 to 75 people, but we've also alluded to the potential for a couple hundred more that would be partial participants. So when you're thinking about the budget, that would have an impact.
Yeah.
Even though you're not subsidizing those additional people, we talked about keeping track of that production and, how much they were diverting. So there's a management of that is not really in the scope of this contract. So just want to throw that out there and keep that in mind because we have a lot of people that are interested in participating. Not all want to remove all the toilets, but I certainly think we should open it up to anybody that wants to participate because for one, it's going to be good to be inclusive, but also I think those numbers might be surprising. Might be really good high quality. So I'm thinking we need at least 2 million or more.
Jump in.
Steve has his hand up before you.
Okay.
First, a tiny technical thing for Amy. An obvious question would be, what's the largest single amount you can take at one time? Because it's obviously going to influence the size of the tank truck they get. Right? Does that make sense? I mean, I don't expect you to answer
It's not
it
about
now,
the
but
volume,
when you-
it's about the concentration and feeding it in slowly. You said a number of 7,000 milligrams per liter. Our influent is normally between, say, 50 to 70 milligrams per liter. So so the short answer to Doug's earlier question is, my main concern is our groundwater discharge permit. So, we just need to, if the town were going to take this, we would need to make sure we did it in a way that we could meet our permit and handle the logistics safely.
Yeah, I'm
so
just saying,
the
that in
volume-
your discussions, an obvious number, maybe you've thought of this already, you want to come up with is, what is the largest tank truck that you can unload in 15 minutes or half an hour?
So we take septage trucks all the time, and they're, 1,500 to
pure
3,000
urine.
gallons. Right. There's
I mean, the
septage.
largest one of pure urine.
Yeah, so I don't have that answer
No,
right
I
now,
don't-
but we
I'm
would
just
need
saying,
to, we'd need
when
to
you're
figure it out.
talking, it's the obvious number to come up with to give them to influence what size truck they buy.
So we just couldn't take the truck and put that wastewater in our system. We would
Yeah,
need
this
a
is-
way
yeah.
of feeding it in
I'm
slowly,
gonna-
so it's more
I'm
complicated.
going to try to jump in here just a little bit. This is we have consultants that advise us on how to run the treatment plant and deal with the process. Pure urine lacks carbon.
Yep.
And you have to have the right ratio of carbon and nitrogen in order for the bugs that make our plant run the way it does be happy. So the real question comes down to somebody who is familiar with treatment plant kinetics to look at likely concentrations, likely acceptable feed rates, et cetera. Nobody's been told to go do that, but as you say, up till now, we've been working that we're not going to go try to figure out how big a tank to have, how to bleed it, how to store a carbon product to add to it, et cetera, that we would see if we got through 50, 75 homes, and it was gonna be a good program. It was gonna be, because we could go and do something right now to accommodate 50 or 75 homes, and if at the end of the day, we got to accommodate 500 or 1,000 homes, now it's a whole different thing that we need to put in place and set up in order to receive it. So it's.
And there's also, despite the advantages that Doug listed correctly for the auxiliary study with the cubies, if it meant that it brought in so much urine that it torpedoed the overall project, you'd have to think about that trade-off.
All right, I got a hand up in the audience. Earl?
Yeah, Earl Barnhart, Green Center. A couple things. You've been saying 50 to 75 people. It's 50 to 75 homes.
Yeah.
If you did 50 homes, it's 100 people. I don't think you have to worry about where you're going to put the urine. You don't have to put it in the local wastewater treatment plant. You do what the Rich Earth Institute has done. You give it to farmers to put on hayfields. And they have done studies, and they find that for every acre of hayfield, it can take a year's worth of urine from 10 people. If you have 100 people in this study, you're talking 10 acres. Somewhere there are 10 acres, either on the Cape or over the bridge. Some farm of 10 acres per year would handle a urine from 100 people. I propose that the logistics of this is simply to hire a licensed septic hauler, which they exist now, have them pump it out of people's homes, take it over the bridge, and sell it to a farmer. And that's the simple solution.
The person that
As
should answer
is.
that is the two Bryans. Is there anything wrong with what he just said?
No, I mean, I would agree with that. I think that's the long-term vision.
But I mean, if it's that simple, then why should the town pay you guys to improve on it?
So I think, pasteurization makes sense. So I think, that's what the Rich Earth Institute is doing. They have what they call a urine depot. So everyone that's diverting urine in the city of Brattleboro or around there brings their urine to the depot. In this case, I think our local regulators have expressed concern about people transporting their own urine like they do in Vermont. So I think the idea would be that we would have a licensed hauler. We actually have the first licensed urine-only hauler coming to help us out with some tank pump outs pretty soon here in the state of Massachusetts. So that's not far off in the future that will be available. So I think having a hauler pick up the urine from these people, bring it to a central facility like a urine depot, pasteurize it, perhaps remove the phosphorus like I mentioned, whatever adjustments need to be made to make it into a viable fertilizer, and then just like Earl said, I think, that's the vision, to distribute it to farmland. And, hopefully, that we have some time before people are actually collecting urine throughout this project. So, I'm hopeful that, perhaps that 80 grand that you're talking about, for the preliminary work, could include some of that exploration of where this could go, and perhaps we could avoid having to go to the treatment plant at all. I mean, that's what I would prefer.
I'm going to cut off discussion on urine diversion at this point, because we've got barely over a half hour remaining, and we wanted to at least get to the introduction of another estuary, in this case Fiddler's Cove. Lost my agenda. It's item 3, I believe. Oh, it's on the back of this. But thanks everybody for attending and keeping the conversation going. And I guess, Amy, you and I need to find some time in Mike's calendar to determine how to, even if it'll take a couple of weeks minimum in order to get something together and bring somebody on board to be ready to start marching around and checking these out. And I guess if I can, to Hilda and Earl, you've mentioned you've got 110 people interested. To the extent you've got any additional information on the number of bathrooms they have, their willingness to do, what their initial thoughts are on, we'll do 2 bathrooms or we'll do 1 of 3 or whatever. That would be helpful to know how to prioritize who we go talk to first.
I think Kim has done a survey. Not everybody has filled out the survey, so we have a good idea of how many bathrooms they have.
Yeah, we haven't seen any of that information. So as we're putting together an RFP and whatnot, we can use that information and say, so far we have 110 people that have expressed interest.
Yeah, might be a little bit more, but some people are out of town, they end up in Falmouth, and there are lots of other towns that are now starting to get interested in exactly the same program.
It could be in Costa Rica looking for the Quetzal bird. It's a very pretty bird. If you've never looked it up, please do. Oh, that's Costa Rica's famous for sloths and Quetzal birds. Kim is on vacation in Costa Rica, so I'm hoping he sees a Quetzal bird.
Yep.
Are you ready?
Having set you up with that, are there any Quetzal birds nesting in Fiddler's Cove?
Probably not.
Okay.
Kristen Rathjen, Science Wares. So I'm going to go through Fiddler's Cove in the same way we talked about the Bourne's Pond. So I won't go in the background as in depth because it's all the same. This is the heat map from the MEP of Fiddler's Cove. The Sentinel Station is up here in the upper reach of Fiddler's Cove. Fiddler's Cove is divided into 2 sub-embayments, Fiddler Main and Fiddler Upper, and Fiddler Upper has 3 sub-watersheds within it. Trout Pond, and then the less than 10-year travel time and greater than 10-year travel time. Fiddler's Cove is a man-made embayment. There is no historical record of eelgrass ever present in that embayment. So the MEP water quality tolerance levels, thresholds, were focused on the benthic habitats. These are the tables, these are the numbers that come from the tables in the MEP, which have the MEP present loading for the 2 different sub-embayments, their calculated threshold load, and then the build-out load. So when you turn those around and calculate that as a mass per year, the removal requirements are all in the upper sub-embayment. 352 for the present loading scenario, 764 for build-out. The Cape Cod Commission, their watershed planning tool, their number for removal is 355 kilograms. So that means there hasn't really been much change to that watershed since the time of the MEP. So the water quality monitoring, the long-term water quality monitoring is done by Buzzards Bay Coalition. There has never been long-term monitoring or even really any monitoring at the Sentinel Station. Buzzards Bay Coalition monitors these 2 sites, the blue flags, and the primary one is FC1. That's this monitoring station from the MEP. So threshold for that portion, that sub-embayment, is 0.37, and the MEP had a present load of about 0.39. So the Buzzards Bay data, 2022 was at 0.38. You can see 2020 was at 0.40. So it's not far off as far as nitrogen concerns for that particular station, but there is no data for the actual Sentinel Station. The other parameters, that's what the major concern is for the benthic habitat. It's the oxygen and it's the chlorophyll. This is the same slide that was in the Bourne's Pond presentation, which basically just reviews what the town's prior strategy has been for watershed planning, some of the new rules and some of the considerations. For Fiddler's Cove in particular, how to address future growth. That I'll talk about in a couple slides. So the first scenario, same with that I did with Bourne's Pond, was applying the proposed 300-foot IA boundary. So if you think back to what those removal charts were, the removal requirements, there was no nitrogen removal requirement for the main sub-embayment. So this very faint blue line here, that's the sub-embayment line. So that's why there's no red dots forward of that. So these red dots are parcels that are within 300 feet of the estuary, as well as the couple that are within 300 feet of Trout Pond. The yellow parcels, that is where, according to the county database, there are existing IAs. Teal here, this is New Silver Beach Sewer Service Area. When you do the math the same way, using the individual water use per parcels that comes from the Cape Cod Commission, factor in wastewater and removal at 10 milligrams per liter beyond Title V, these are the numbers you come out with. There are fertilizer and stormwater credits in that main sub-embayment, as well as the upper sub-embayment. So the 300-foot boundary alone, based on water use, you get to your present load requirement. You don't with build-out. One thing to note about Trout Pond, according to the MEP, Trout Pond has a 27% outflow to Fiddler's Cove and also has a 50% attenuation rate. So that is why the nitrogen removal numbers for even just a handful of parcels is very, very low, because not much is actually going to Fiddler's Cove. So looking at that with what percent removal you're targeting, what you're hitting with your targets, you can see it's well above 100% for that, and over 60% for the build-out scenario. So to reach build-out scenario, you would likely have to expand a septic improvement area. So based on the present loading, the blue parcels that are highlighted would be considered as part of the expanded septic improvement area. When you do that and you look at the proposed future wastewater, which is based off of current zoning regulations, it doesn't account for 40B potential, you would be able to get there by expanding that zone, again at 10 milligrams per liter. So, the build-out consideration for Fiddler's Cove, the majority of the build-out is based on two parcels. This one right here and this one right here. And recently, this parcel highlighted in yellow has been mostly slated for conservation. That's the joint space parcel that they're talking about, having the 50 acres in conservation, about 7.5 acres developed as affordable housing. So that greatly changes the build-out potential for the watershed. Even with the affordable housing, depending what comes through, I heard rumors that it would be in the northeast portion where there's already a residence. Depending where discharge is, that could impact Rand's Canal or it could impact Fiddler's Cove. So that's a consideration that should be thought about when doing the watershed plans. As a reminder, under the watershed plans, if the town does not put any planning or thought considerations in how they're going to address growth or build out, then it's interpreted that the Title V upgrade requirements for new construction would be required. So in this scenario where you can meet your present loading conditions with IAs along the 300-foot boundary, this could be an ideal watershed where maybe the town wants to see that mandate actually go into effect. And then finally, this is just a draft of what your watershed permit phases could look like. So Fiddler's Cove does not have a CWMP. So the first task in there is to develop the CWMP. That's slated for 2026, 2028 to have the plan developed, submit it to the state for approval, get the secretary's certificate. It is in the last group of plans for applying for watershed permits. So ideally that will be done on or before January of 2030. Realistically, if you go with the 300-foot boundary, that can be implemented well before even the CWMP is done, but that's a decision that would have to be made. And then going through and doing the adaptive management and seeing how things change in that watershed again, like that 57-acre parcel that changes how the build-out potential for that watershed looks like. That's what I got.
One of the things is, I did notice you used the quote state target of 10. Currently, the Board of Health is 12. So if,
The state's at 19, right?
states on, in Falmouth, we're 12.
No, but the state is still.
Right, the state is still at 19,
Yeah, but it,
with what's approved, so.
I would, if it's not a big lift, and you could look at the 300-foot boundary and using the 12, because we were exceeding it, I just would be curious as to how close we came at the 12.
Yep. Yeah, I can do that.
Steve, the Nitro Systems, their provisional letter says 11 at the moment.
Yeah, I'm using because if we turned around and wanted to push a couple of these watersheds and said, you know, if you sell the property, you have new construction or anything else, you will have to put in an IA, but, you know, we anticipate that we're gonna designate everybody inside this area coming future, we'd be getting 12, so it's worthwhile seeing what happens at 12. Steve?
Kristen, I'm glad you pointed out in one slide, you might want to, yeah, no, you just went past the requirement, if you don't cover build-out, you have to have the new construction rule. That, I must be missing something, but it seems like a no-brainer to me that you cover build-out with a regulation requiring the people doing the building out to have a very good system.
And that was the decision when the town submitted their notices of intent. That suspended that requirement, but it allows the town time to decide if that's the route that they want to go.
You know, I'm just asking everybody as a general question, why isn't that a no-brainer? I mean, politically especially, as well as technically, the parcels that would be the build-out, if and when you build there, you have to put in a good IA.
It's a high probability of a conclusion in the watershed plan for this watershed.
Part of it now is, to John's point, of the responsible management entity. So installing all of these systems where they don't have best available nitrogen reducing technology yet, and we don't have an RME yet. You didn't want a mandate going through for subpar systems in the interim.
But you wouldn't mandate the 300, all the properties within the 300-foot area until you had all that taken care of anyway.
Yep.
So by definition, that's taken care of. So you just say, and if it's those properties plus whoever builds something new.
And that's the way, that could be the way that the watershed plan is written.
I mean, all life should be that simple.
In some ways, this is a fairly simple watershed to look at, but in terms of, this is a good one because it lays out pretty starkly the details that will have to unfold to tell people you're going to have to upgrade your system to an IA and the timetable for doing it, okay? That's why this is a good one.
So there's also very limited tools for this one. There's no shellfish here. MES didn't do any shellfish surveys for several reasons. The main one being that the underwater rights are privately owned. So that creates a larger hurdle for the expansion of the municipal program. The estuary is also only conditionally approved, which means you can only do seed shellfish in there. So you can't do any grow out potential, so no floating gear. There is, according to Chuck, there is a substantial wild population of quahogs and oysters within there. So I think even trying to cite if it were fully open for shellfish would be challenging as well. So that's not an option within there.
Steve, can I comment?
Please.
So, you know, we looked at the 300-foot boundary right around the harbor for IAs. The yellow parcel is the Healer parcel, most of which will be conservation land. The white parcel, I can't remember the owner of that. We looked at that as a site for the New Silver Beach sewer plant. A lot of that is very wet.
Yeah.
So I don't think in that big parcel, there's going to be a lot of buildings. So if you then say, okay, we've got to identify another 400 kilograms of nitrogen to remove, we don't have a lot of parcels in there to get that.
Right.
Another way of putting what I was saying is.
I got you, Matt.
What, just a second.
I got you.
Can anybody imagine telling somebody in one of those little properties that doesn't have a red dot, that now you have a red dot because somebody in the yellow area is putting in new development and they don't have to put in an IA? That,
They will be. Yeah, I mean, the watershed plan for this.
That big blue
this is-
one, that big yellow one's in that, you'd have to put an IA in.
Right.
If we're expanding red dots, that was one that had a red dot.
yeah, it's obvious. I'll shut up about this.
Big red dot.
Matt, you want to make a comment?
Yeah.
You come up and use the microphone so they can pick you up. Somebody wakes up in the middle of the night and sees you, they're going to want to understand what you're saying.
So one of the things that I'm aware of, and not a lot of people in Falmouth are aware of, is the new Silver Beach waste collection system, and that it's being discharged at the North Falmouth School, if I remember correctly, underneath the ball fields. Now, I can't locate it on the map.
It's the blue part,
Is it the light green?
it's the blue parcel at the bottom in
It's
the
the
middle.
aqua blue color?
Yeah, just-
Yeah, the lower
So
left corner.
that's actually in the Wild Harbor watershed, not the Fiddler's Cove.
Correct.
I was just wanted some point of clarification, because that's, at what treatment level is that plant operating at? That's an older facility.
10
At what treatment
milligrams.
It's actually newer, well, Amy, it's running well, right?
10 milligrams per liter.
10 milligrams per liter. So the reason I was asking about that is because that would be a way to make up nitrogen because of our own discharge. But obviously, the good thing is that we could learn from wastewater in the town of Falmouth is that these smaller plants that keep the nitrogen discharge in the same watershed have the greatest impact. Because when we get to Wild Harbor, we're sewering that area, but it's being treated and discharged in the same watershed, unlike our Cullen facility, which takes nitrogen from the south coast and discharges it in West Falmouth.
And Woods Hole and Surf Drive
Right,
downtown.
right. The south, that's what I'm saying, the south coast, instead of specific watersheds.
Good point. All right.
Just a point on the Healer Augusta parcel there. It's likely that any development is going to be confined, actually outside the watershed. It's going to be right there.
Yep.
Rand's Canal
That's the
water.
plan.
Yeah, so it's going to be in the Rance Canal watershed, which will have
Its
its
own
own
issues.
set of issues, but it might be an opportunity for this committee to assist in, both an affordable housing project and reducing nitrogen, if there's some way we can help identify funding sources to put in a denitrifying system there.
This is a little bit off topic, but it's on topic. Last time around, Ken, you raised some concerns and questions on lot sizes and the ability to put IAs in.
Right.
The brilliant person at the microphone, who really knows how to use GIS information, has actually gone and done a little sort of screening of that. And perhaps we should put that on to the agenda for the next meeting. But what we did is we looked at available area on a lot, available area. I reached out to one of our engineers in town to confirm, sort of the typical scale of an IA system in terms of footprint that it needs to occupy. And we use that just to screen, to find out, how tight things might become, okay? So it's not a definitive thing, but it's
It's a
an
good
instructive picture to look at.
general tool for,
And I think the first pass at it would say that not a lot of properties will drop out on the scale size from being able to do an IA. Okay, but we'll come back to that next meeting. Okay. With that, thank you. And I would say if you run it at 12, just distribute it. We don't need to do another presentation, unless people want to see what it looks like at 12. Okay. Where are we at? Discussion on funding opportunities. You sat in on a phone call?
I did, as did Kristen and Brian B. from MassTech. And there's not a great deal of money in these the programs they talked about. 900,000 in planning grant 604B, and about 3 million in 319 grant programs. It's a competitive program, multi-year. The RFP is going to be coming out probably sometime in February, toward the end of the month. The opportunity is there for an entity such as the town of Falmouth or this committee or some group to have a discussion with them about a specific proposal prior to release of the RFP. Once the RFP is out there, they can't discuss with you an individual proposal. So it probably behooves us to decide who and what discussion we would have with these folks to see if something, they mentioned in specific things like permeable reactive barrier projects, possibly the urine diversion project. The fact that you have some matching money is not required. They've got some budget finagles in plain English that the state used, that for this particular fiscal year's program, matchings would not be required. But matchings would give you a leg up on those that had no match money. We probably should pursue this. It's competitive, but I think from what I heard and saw of projects that have been done, yeah, go for it. It's there, and I think we've got a project in concept anyway, with a lot of bugs to be worked out in urine diversion that maybe we should put forward. That, Kristen, I don't know, you participated or listened also. That pretty much agree with what I said, or did I make a mistake?
So the 604B program is for planning purposes and water quality monitoring specifically. 319 is for implementation, and prior to being eligible for a 319 grant, there has to be a state-approved watershed-based plan, and that's based off of the EPA requirements. Nobody except for one small estuary in Brewster on Cape has a approved watershed-based plan. So to go for a 319 grant, that has to be completed first. And one of the things that Malcolm said was for this year, that watershed, the approved watershed-based plan had to be completed by contract, which was in the fall. Going forward, other cycles, it's going to be a requirement for application.
Well, we've been saying all along that this urine diversion is much bigger than Falmouth, that it can benefit the whole county for sure, if not the state or other parts of the country. So why wouldn't it be in our interest to partner with Brewster? Even if the UDs were out there, we get the DEP approval.
Because their watershed-based plan didn't have any requirements for septic, it was all stormwater management.
Or even in some other part of Massachusetts.
But it would be that would be worth having a conversation of how you come up with a watershed-based plan for a regional project. So that would be something to bring up with the funding agency.
But it's a
What Falmouth has done is not a water-based plan.
But it's a program that's going to be ongoing, so this is not a one-time program.
Yeah, it's every year. This year, they held last year's bipartisan infrastructure money, so it's a slightly bigger pot than normal for both programs. But the 604 can be used. They said their priorities were basically nitrogen areas. The 604 could be used for developing CWMPs, TWMPs, and then converting those into the watershed-based plans, so you can apply for funding from that aspect. And then one of their priorities for 319 was installation of IAs in nitrogen-impaired areas, But if you don't have a watershed-based plan, you can't apply for those funds.
It's a good program to keep track of as we
Yes.
move through our watershed planning. And when we're ready to get money, because we've got a plan in place, go get some money.
I hear what Kristen is saying about, it doesn't sound like it fits urine diversion. But if this were a small company and I owned it, I would be on the phone at 9 AM tomorrow to those people and arrange beating on their door, because I suspect they're looking for creative ideas. And urine diversion may be something they've never even heard of. But it makes so much more sense to fund that than just to pay for somebody to write their CWMP. Everybody knows how to write a CWMP or how to hire a contractor, and there've got to be dozens of them written. It's stupid to pay one town a bunch of federal or state money to write one CWMP when you could use it to research a whole technology and get DEP approval.
What I don't understand is what is the difference between what we're doing and a watershed-based plan? The definition of that, what is it?
So you can put a lot of the elements of the CWMP, you can roll a lot of them into the watershed-based plan. There's 9 key elements that they have for the watershed-based plan. And looking at the CWMP we have for the South Coast, looking at an area like Wacoit, if we wanted to try and do IA installations, there's a lot more information that needs to be flushed out for the specifics of the nitrogen loading than what's in our CWMP presently for that area. So,
I'm going to make a suggestion.
yep.
What we identified here is that you guys participated in a phone call on a program. Let's add it to a future agenda. We're not going to apply for anything this week. We don't have the bandwidth for.
Yeah, but remember, Ed has said, I don't think Kristen disagrees, they're asking for input before they send out the RFP.
And the RFP is
So
mid-February.
Steve, this is a case of bandwidth. We need to get going on doing the urine diversion. There's a whole bunch of things we've got to get done. So who's going to do this? Who's going to put all this time and effort into pursuing this grant right now? Who's going to do it?
Well, what if I made the initial phone call and they said yes?
Go ahead.
Would somebody else write it up?
No, you get to write it up.
Let's see if we have that problem. I think the phone calls are
The Green Center would write it up.
But I'm suggesting this is a program out there that is ongoing. If we're not ready this year to go get whatever, 50 or 100,000, but are ready going to years forward to get 50, 100, whatever we can get, I would suggest you put together a little something to explain this grant program a little bit better, so we know about it. The other thing under funding opportunities, you passed to me some deadlines under the next round of SNAP.
Yep, SNEP said that their RFP is coming out probably around the same time, mid-February, so that will be released
Mid-February,
soon.
right? So people should keep that on their calendar. And then lastly, the town did send a letter back to the USDA, NRCS, identifying 4 projects that they are requesting grant assistance with. And, one of them is a fish passage, another one is another fish passage. One of them is to address stormwater discharge on one of the roads in Mara Vista as a sort of a demonstration of how to eliminate an outfall in a flat stream. And we put in, for the upper portion of the Childs River watershed, doing the engineering or field work to be able to site the size of permeable reactive barrier. And I think we sent them back a budget of a couple $100,000. So if that goes forward, they fund quote 100% of design. Permitting falls on the community. So, we see where we land on this, and then probably fall town meeting if we need to go in and get some money for the permitting side, whatever that would be. I'm sure Chuck and DPW with the similar of the other 3 they have, but we'll see where that one goes. It did go in on January 19th or thereabouts.
And this agency's part of USDA?
Yeah, it's under the USDA.
Yep.
It's the natural resource.
Yep.
Yeah, it's spaghetti soup to me at this point, but, the fact that they're willing to pay 100% of design and
Yes.
75% of actual construction, and the burden is for the town to pick up the permitting. there's an issue of land ownership, but they can work around that as long as the town has easement rights or whatever, okay?
Brian said he said tonight, he's good at writing grants. What's the overlap between the grant that he has to write to convince town meeting and the grant that he could write on a word processor with some small changes to the first one to the agency that Ed is talking about?
Ed has his contact, give him a call and find out.
For this,
You're back to the 604B grant.
Yeah. I can't believe that you guys are rejecting the possibility of it.
Brian was on the call this morning as well.
yes, he was. The
Well, then I
604B,
don't
does
even
that-
have to explain it to him.
the 604B does not have that watershed-based plan requirement then.
Correct.
So that might be potential funding for even what you're talking about, Steve, on permeable reactive barrier, because it's for planning and monitoring, not implementation.
Yep.
So it might be funds that could help the town do the engineering you're talking about for that reactive barrier, correct?
Again, we're gonna get 100% from USDA.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, I guess you can't get more than 100%.
We gotta pay for.
I know, but
Yeah, yeah.
Steve, you have an audience.
See, there's a couple of hands. in the-
I'm gonna start down here and then I'll come with you. Yeah, short a walk to the microphone for her.
Maggie McGaw, I live in Waquoit, and it's really a question. I don't really understand whether or not the town of Falmouth has a paid grant writer.
I do not.
And I just wonder what the process is of suggesting that that be done.
It's
I
under,
mean,
yeah, it's under discussion. The process would be that you would go to town meeting to create a new position, and then when the budget comes up, you would go to town meeting to fund the position.
I mean, every time I hear Andy Gottlieb speak at a meeting, he talks about the fact that there's more money available for environmental remediation work now than there has been in decades. And what Steve Layton has just said, I think is exactly right. This is,
I'm not disagreeing that
But-
we should pursue grants, but if we don't have staff or resources to pursue it, how do we pursue it? That's all I'm saying.
Brian
The previous
Baumgart.
administration determined that each department would write their own grant when appropriate. But the new administration is leaning towards prioritizing having a person who's more in charge of keeping track of grants that are out there and applying for them and helping departments to file for grants.
Matt, be quick, we're 1 minute over.
No worries. I've been following wastewater in other towns on Cape Cod to see what they're doing a little bit differently than ours. By watching the Mashpee Sewer Commission and Selectmen meeting, Andrew Gottlieb spoke at that meeting. It's my understanding that $40 million of Mashpee's wastewater system was picked up under a grant. You know, maybe we should find out what grant that was, because if they're picking up sewer projects, that would take a big burden off taxpayer of a Falmouth. So, $40 million, out of the $53 million project that they just completed, or they just funded, the taxpayers of Mashpee only had to pay $13 million. That's a pretty good discount. So if we could do some research on that and find out what grant that was and see if we could be the next one in line for that, that'd be great.
All right. If anybody's got a burning report from any members or staff, now's the
Ed, do you
time.
want to say anything about this proposed Mashpee meeting Friday morning, or not? Just to let the rest of the committee know that Mashpee's pursuing a UD, or at least finding out about it.
They want to be brought up to speed.
Yeah.
Do you want, I thought you were going to raise your hand and give a brief report on Mr. Weeks's nice letter.
I could, but
Need more time.
it's going great.
Maybe at the next.
The next meeting I will.
You give us a quick
Okay.
summary.
I didn't want to do just his and not do the other
That's fine.
contractors.
I remember in the past, you've come in
And
and
I'll-
said X, Y, Z, and,
I'll see one of the contractors at a meeting I'm supposed to be at a half hour ago.
all right. There are minutes of the prior meeting.
Yes.
Any errata, corrections, improvements?
I had one point that I think wasn't worded correctly. The fourth item about the outfall where Steve reported that GHD has been tasked to plot the best route and then, for the outfall pipe, and then have that route put into the GIS map for an existing utility, as an existing utility, and I think it wasn't worded quite right in the minutes as submitted. So it should say, if I'm correct, that that best route would be added as an existing utility to the map.
So just where it says existing utilities, you could just change it to it.
As an existing utility, so that when that route is picked, it would be put there as if it was already in existence.
It will be
Is
added.
that the plan? I'm not sure.
That's
but-
what I understood Steve was saying.
Yeah, that's, the goal is, as we go into the outfall alignments and whatnot, that
Right,
we'll turn around and say, there is a pipe this size
that's gonna
Already
be there.
that is in the GIS system, so when people go to
Okay,
the GIS map.
that's in there, yeah, not as it's actually there, but planned to be there.
That'll be inserted into the GIS
Yep.
as a utility,
What if we just call it a proposed utility easement or something?
however you want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to do it, but I just,
Well, I think the intent of your words was it would be considered already there. This is reserved, no?
It's reserved,
it's reserved, it's not as if it was there.
Yeah,
It goes into GIS as a utility,
as a utility.
okay?
Yeah,
I think the wording needs just a tweak there.
That's good,
Reserved is good.
I like
Yeah.
Better than
reserve.
proposed.
all right. All
So-
those in favor of accepting, the minute says, so noted?
Yes.
Signify by saying aye.
yes.
All those opposed? Not hearing any opposition, I declare it to be unanimous. Is there another motion anybody wishes to make?
Adjourn.
Second.
The motion's been made to adjourn and seconded. All those in
Yep.
favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I rule it's unanimous vote.
Yes, so noted.